At this, we'll move on to agenda item number 2, public comments. Kendall, do we have anybody signed up for public comments?
No, sir, no public comments.
Okay. Let me just remind all those that we will have a second opportunity for public comments at the conclusion of the meeting. We'll open it up once again for public comments at that point. Moving on to item number 3, the approval of the minutes from the previous San Antonio Regional Flood Planning Group meeting for Region 12. I think we have copies of the meeting minutes. So I'll give a moment for you guys to take a look at that, and then I'll entertain a motion.
Debbie Reed, make a motion to approve as written.
Can I get a second?
Yeah, I'll second.
Stephen's always second. You got a motion? Any discussion? Anything that we need to amend or change? Any discussion on there? Hearing none. All in favor of approving the minutes for the previous Regional Flood Planning Group meeting, please say aye.
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 Any opposed? Hearing none, item passes. We'll move on to item number 4, communications from the Texas Water Development Board. Is Anita on the call?
I am.
All right, Anita, take it over.
Hello. So for my first update, I just want to mention the tech memo. When we originally received the January submission, we had one RFI that we sent out to the sponsor and the technical consultants. That has been resolved, and I have sent the notice to proceed on the task 5. I just want to send a reminder that we have to submit the March 7 tech memo extended deadline deliverables, and then also want to note that we are doing informal comments, further just informal comment review for the January deliverables. And we expect to deliver those in spring of 2022. And then I also want to note that we had a technical consultants call on Monday, February 28th. That was very productive. We also had our chair's conference call yesterday. We expect to put both of those on the website and encourage you all to view it. We went over a lot of technical subjects, but also went into a deeper conversation about the FMS, FMPs, and FMEs that I think you all would find valuable. So I will let you all know once that is posted to the website. And then, oh, perfect, here I have my slides up. Next, I want to jump into my presentation. I'm going to go over the regional flood planning. Oh, can you still go back to the original slide? I just want to go over the regional flood planning, flood risk reduction project types. This is just going to be a brief overview. This is again of the FMEs, FMPs, and FMSs. I know our last meeting there were some questions about distinguishing an FME from an FMS, and I'm hoping to answer some of that questions or misunderstandings anyone may have had. But like I said, during the Cheers conference call yesterday, there was a deeper dive into each of those project types. So once we get that posted to the website, I definitely encourage you all to view that as well. Next slide. So you all are hearing me use the abbreviated terms. FME is the flood management evaluation, FMP, the flood mitigation project, and then FMS is flood mitigation management strategies. Sorry, I'll be going over those briefly. Also showing you the flow chart that we updated and presented in one of our webinars late last year, and then leave it open for any questions you all may have. Next slide. So first is flood management evaluations. This is going to be a proposed flood study of a specific flood-prone area that is needed in order to assess flood risk and or determine whether there are potentially feasible FMSs or FMPs. These will not have construction capital costs at all. So examples of these would include watershed planning, hydraulic and hydrologic modeling, also known as H&H modeling, flood mapping updates, regional watershed studies, also engineering project planning, feasibility assessments, preliminary engineering, so alternative analysis, and up to 30% design, and then also studies on flood preparedness. These are to be recommended in the regional plans to make clear what additional studies and funds are available to support them and are needed to adequately evaluate all flood-prone areas within a region. These could be utilized to identify and quantify flood risk and find a feasible solution to that risk. Next slide. So flood mitigation projects, oh my God, I don't know why evaluations is on there. I apologize, everyone. So it's supposed to just say flood mitigation projects, FMPs. This is a proposed project, either structural or non-structural, that has non-zero capital costs and other non-reoccurring costs. And when implemented, will reduce flood risk, mitigate flood hazards to life or property. The RFPGs are strongly encouraged to consider nature-based flood risk reduction solutions in their overall approach. FMPs shall be permittable, constructible, and implementable. One thing I want to point out in that definition is that they have non-zero capital costs and other non-reoccurring costs when it comes to the implementation stage. And then it also has to provide mitigation to life and property. So I just wanted to point that out. I provided some structural examples, so low water crossings or bridge improvements, infrastructure like channels, ditches, and ponds, some natural-based projects, as well as regional detention projects. And then some non-structural examples will be your property or easement acquisition, flood early warning systems, elevation of individual structures, and then flood-proofing projects. The primary function of each recommended FMP must be flood risk reduction, and they must include quantifiable flood risk reduction benefits. The RFPGs will also identify the reason for their recommendation based on evaluations initiated in Task 4 and completed in Task 5. Again, I would just like to state that the primary function of FMPs is flood risk reduction and include that quantifiable flood risk reduction benefit to life or property. These will include permit and detailed design, construction, and implementation phases of the project. Next slide. So here I just wanted to highlight a flow chart that we provided in the Exhibit C guidance, page 61. This is a flow chart focused more on FMPs and how you decide whether a flood risk solution could fall into an FMP itself. Next slide. Lastly, we have our flood management strategies. This is a proposed plan to reduce flood risk or mitigate flood hazards to life or property. The RFPG has some flexibility on how they choose to utilize FMSs in the regional flood planning process. For example, RFP should choose not to recommend any FMSs if they choose. You would utilize FMS when a flood risk reduction item does not fit into an FME or an FMP. And these also does not have any construction or other capital costs. At a minimum, RFPG should include FMSs as any proposed action that the group would like to identify, evaluate, or recommend that does not qualify as either an FME or an FMP. So whenever you have that flood risk solution that's not able to be placed as FME as a study or as a project, you can save those and recommend those as an FMS. So some example would be non-engineering studies, floodplain regulation development, flood authority or revenue raising studies, or public awareness program. RFPGs may include a strategy that has no cost associated with it at this time. As an FMS, non-reoccurring, non-capital costs are the only costs that will be potentially eligible for funding. So we just wanted to highlight that to you all. specific identified? Is there sufficient data to complete project details? And are there specific construction costs? Those are the 3 central questions you want to ask yourself whenever you're thinking about a flood risk solution and whether it would be an FME, an FMP, or an FMS. This flowchart we updated and hoped that it would make the decision process more transparent and easier to understand. Next slide. I just want to end by saying that if you have any questions, and we have not yet put out that Chair's conference call video on the website, feel free to contact me. I can understand how everyone is preparing for task 5, and it's important to understand the differences between these project types. So I definitely want to extend out my availability to help you get any questions, no matter how small you think they may be, answered. And then I open the floor to any questions you all may have.
Thank you so much, Anita. Is there any questions from the committee regarding some of these definitions? I know in previous meetings, Ron, and we've discussed these before, but is there any specific questions that we may have for Anita at this point?
This is Debbie Reed, and I just have a comment. Thank you so much for clarifying this because we've spent a lot of time on that.
No worries. Thank you.
I just want to add one comment that I think it's pretty exciting that there is these different categories, and it's not just you got to bring in a project that's well defined and engineering studies have already been done for consideration. It really opens up the potential that if there is a need, there's 3 different opportunities to be able to resolve that need. And that's what's kind of exciting about this process, that it's not unlike, say, a city bond project where you have to have something already well defined before it could be funded. There are opportunities that, to consider a study or some non-engineering, non-structural methods of improvement. So there are opportunities, and to me, this is exciting because we can bring everything we know of so that it can be addressed, and it really opens up the field. So,
right. I will share. Oh, sorry.
No, go ahead.
I just want to share 2 things. Yeah, another comment just saying that FMSs were created to be that catch-all last option for a solution you may have that you really want to make a part of the plan, but is not falling in the FME or FMP category. And then I also want to share that during the chair's conference call yesterday, when they went deeper in, they talked about the tables, the data tables that need to be filled out, and how there are some optional ones where you necessarily don't need to fill in that information, but we definitely recommend and advise those to be filled out as much as possible because they could play a part in the ranking process. So I just wanted to share that here.
This is Suzanne. I do have a question just about process, and I don't know if this is the right time, or are we going to have a conversation about this after her presentation?
No, go ahead, Suzanne. This is the time.
Okay. I'm just trying to understand when are these identified, and are we going to have a process that we do as a committee as to how these are going to be vetted? You know, in other words, how are organizations and individuals or whoever bringing forward these ideas in these 3 categories, and then how are we going to, as a regional flood planning group, sort of assess these to be included in our ultimate submittal? I mean, I'm just trying to get an understanding of the timeline and the process. And are we going to do a call for projects I'm using projects as the catch-all for all 3 categories: projects, strategies, and evaluations. Just trying to understand kind of how we're going to get from here to there in a process, and then when do we have to have these identified and prioritized?
Yeah, I will say on my part, as far as the agency is concerned, you all already voted on a process to identify the FMEs, FMPs, and FNSs. I will also say we just created the technical committee for Region 12, and that's going to play a big part in the process of narrowing these down before they bring it to the full board. I could pass it over to the technical consultant if he could share maybe a little bit more information if they've strategized how they're going to get that list to maybe the subcommittee first before the full group, or if y'all have already decided that process, because I know my other regions are handling a little bit differently.
Yes, thanks, Anita. And thanks, Suzanne, for the question. I was trying to figure out how I was gonna weave that in today because I wanted to make y'all aware. We've reached out to a lot of the entities already, Suzanne. We've started the email outreach to all the counties, cities, counties, river authorities, and other identities. There's the 110 list of agencies that was provided by the Water Development Board. We're reaching out to each one of them. The initial emails have gone out, I think, to almost everyone. And then we're giving them a little bit of time to respond, email, make sure that the emails are making it to the right person. And then we're gonna call back and start working on those. I do know, just locally, I do know that the bigger areas, I know that the city of San Antonio, I know our sub-consultant has been working with them to gather their information. I know that, and I personally have reached out to the River Authority and the county to start getting their information. And I know we've started collecting the information from Bernie. And so those are the major areas. I know that we're going to have a lot of projects. So we're going to get that list. Once we get that list identified, we're going to take the first cut at saying this is in our eyes, this is an FME, FMP, FMS, and then we're going to come back in this with the technical committee and go through each one and say, here's what it takes to be an FMP. Does it make it? Is this something we're going to go forward? Is it going to have a sponsor? All the things that check the box, we'll go through that. If it's not, we'll drop it to an FME, talk about the things that we want to put on there as FMEs, because I think this group too can add projects, right? I mean, we're not looking to just the entities to add the projects. This group can add projects too, if we know that there's an evaluation or a strategy that needs to be implemented. And we've talked about several strategies that we'd like to implement. And so we're looking to probably get we're kind of asking folks, and we're going to push to try to get the projects probably by the end of the month. And that way next month sometime, starting in April, we can start talking about what to get the technical group, because I know that's probably going to take a couple meetings to hash through all those projects. I know our counterparts in the region, 400 projects, 400 or 500 projects to go through. So, but yeah, we are collecting those, Suzanne. We're reaching out to the entities, and if anybody's aware, the list that, and I can provide the group the list. It's in the report. I can show you which list it is. There's the list of all the entities. It's shown in chapter 1. I can't remember the exact table number. It's the one that we had to resupply the Water Development Board with a few more names on there. And it's the list that we're reaching out to for that. So if there's anybody that we need to reach out to, that anybody on the planning group sees that isn't on that list, then just please let us know. But that's the process, and that's how we'll be bringing it to the technical committee, and then the technical committee will help us make our recommendation to the planning group here. Yes.
Ron, a quick question. Is there a drop dead deadline for submittals?
No, because we know that there's going to be things added as we go. You know, we are pushing to, I will update on the schedule afterwards, because the draft report is due in August, but we have to have a 30-day public comment period on that. So we're going to work backwards from there, get a better, another time frame. We've had this crunch to get to March 7th, and now we're going to, next meeting, we'll talk about what's the push to get to August. But that we're trying our best to try to get all the projects by the end of this month. That way we can wrap that up. But I'm sure that the group, and we're going to have other projects added as we go. So as we go through the process as well.
Ron, if I could add, I know when you guys have had public outreach meetings, the public has also gone to the website and added locations may not necessarily be a project, but certainly made us aware of some of these issues. I've seen the database. In addition, just for the group's information, the city of San Antonio, we've actually hired a consultant to help us gather all the data in a format so that it could be easily digested. So we're not just going to pile in all this information. We're actually trying to organize it to make sure that it comes in, and when it does, it comes in the format that it needs to. So we are in the process of doing that. Suzanne, does that kind of answer your question?
I think so. I mean, I think that when we go through the schedule, it may be more understanding. I do think that understanding when things are going to be submitted, how that's going to be vetted, and then, you know, if the members around the table want to add specific elements, you know, when should we be doing that? Should we be putting that together now so that that's vetted in the course of this process that you're going to, I assume, based on what you said, it's going to be between April and July is where, I mean, April and June, really. If you have to have something done in a 30-day period, it's really April through June is where all this work's going to be done. Am I right based on what you just said?
Yes, ma'am.
I'll
And-
also share really quick that we've updated our conceptual schedule too, that has our hard data and draft plan deadlines on our website. I'm working on putting out a newsletter soon that's going to go out that will also have that information. So you all look out for that too, because that'll have our deadlines and data submittals as well.
Mr. Chair, one other thing is, I know it's been a question, and in the meetings that the Water Development Board had on Monday, and you may have sat in when they had the chair meeting, they may have gone over the same thing, is they talked about the ranking. And I know there's been a lot of questions, and I know we're talking about vetting right now. And the feedback from the Water Development Board is there is a ranking process that's being developed. It's not complete at this time, but they're working through that, and there will be a public comment. So and I'm sure Anita will keep us posted, but there will be public comment, because I know that everyone in this group has been really wanting to know like what it looks like, and but they aren't confident that that's going to be something that's going to go. That's the ranking process may not be available before our draft report in August. So just keep that in mind.
Ron, thank you for bringing it up. I have already been approached a number of times by various stakeholders about the ranking, and I've made it very clear to them that that's going to be the prerogative and that's going to be the responsibility of the board. So certainly, Anita, as you guys start developing something, even if it's in a draft format, something that can be shared with the regions, we certainly would like to learn about that ranking and how that will. One of the things I would mention in the chair's meeting yesterday was about the importance of making sure that we fill in as many of those fields in that database as possible, because that's certainly going to help them. They did reiterate that it hasn't been the scoring hasn't been identified.
Yeah,
but
those fields are what they're going to rank off of.
Exactly.
We just don't know how they're going to be weighted. Okay, so we know what they're going to rank off of. We just don't know how it's going to be weighted.
Right.
Any additional
doing
questions
it.
for Anita?
I just had a quick comment. That's why during my presentation, I just wanted to note that some of those fields are optional, but I just wanted to make you all aware that even though they're optional, they still are going to be a part of the ranking process. So if you have the information, you should still put it in there.
Hearing no additional questions, then Anita, thank you so much for the presentation. Certainly appreciate it. And please keep the lines of communication open so that we hear of things that are to come. At this moment, we'll move on to item number 5, which is the chair report. I have a note here. Just let me just review this. The Texas Water Development Board requested additional information from the Regional Flood Planning Group's technical memo. The additional was sent, or the additional data was sent to Region 12. It's set to continue with the next phase. The other item that I wanted to present really had to do with something we covered yesterday during the chair's meeting. The presentation will be online, and when it is, I'm going to ask if Kendall, if you could please download the presentation given by, I believe he was the attorney, and if you could share that with everybody. It was really interesting because it's not anything new. We have already talked about it, but he reemphasized how important it is that, especially during subcommittee meetings, and that we have the appropriate quorum, and that if we are assigned to a committee, please attend that committee. If you're not a part of that committee and you happen to say, you know, I'm interested in joining because I want to hear what the technical committee is, I'm going to go sit in. If you are one of the voting members, we can potentially be in trouble because we may have issues with quorum. My question was, well, can I log on and just not turn on my camera and listen? They're like, no, you can't do that. So please be careful. And that's why we're going to say, I want to get that presentation shared with all of you, because we need to make sure and follow the rules and guidelines for our meetings. It's important that we have a quorum. It's important that it's transparent. Some of the questions that was raised about the subcommittees were saying, well, you know, what if we have a quorum and can we vote on it? Can we make, and the guidance was, well, you probably don't, because if you're going to vote on something during the technical committee or the outreach committee or whatever other subcommittee, we have to make it public that we're going to take a vote. So all of this really is, and I know we're in a hurry to get things done, but a lot of this has to do with transparency. And I want to make sure that, especially in this process here, that we are transparent and that the public has an opportunity to hear and know that if we're going to talk about something, that we limit that discussion to what's been printed on the agenda. So it'll be really interesting. So please, when you download, let's share it with everybody. And at a future date, I'd like to perhaps go over it just to make sure there isn't any questions. I don't want us to be in a situation where we've done something that, you know what, we need to redo this or not. But it was really interesting, and I thought it was very well worth repeating. So we'll be sharing that with you. That's all I have to report for now. So if there isn't any questions about these two items for me, we'll move on to item number 6. Hearing no questions, let's move to item 6, updates from the Region 12 subcommittees. Let's start off with the technical committee. Mr. Bays.
Yeah, thank you. So we had our meeting on February 10th, and I think the main focus was really driving towards the report that we, are theoretically going to approve today. Talked about how the members would access the report, the ArcGIS, and really a big thing was the deliverable checklist for March 7th. We did also have some discussion on climate change and formulating future projections, as well as labeling data as non-regulatory. And I think Ron or other members of technical, I think I hit the big ones.
Yes, absolutely. That meeting was very strong on what we needed to do to get to Monday.
Any other questions for the technical committee? Hearing none, from the outreach committee. That's Suzanne? Is she still on? Suzanne, are you still?
Yeah, no, I'm still here.
Okay.
We had a meeting, before we had the public meeting, whatever date that was. I know we're going to get an update on that. And I think we have another meeting coming up. I was trying to look at my calendar. I think it's later this month. Is that right, Kendall? I remember we had something on as a hold.
Yes,
I think
ma'am.
on the 25th of March, we have another outreach committee meeting. Is that
Yes,
correct?
ma'am. Yes, we have a hold on that date.
So
Yes,
we
and
really,
the reason for that one, Suzanne, Mr. Chair, Planning Group, is we do have another round of outreach we're going to have to be doing for
Right.
Once we identify our FMEs, FMPs, and FMSs. And I know you're going to say, hey, you just told me we haven't identified all of those yet. We got to start thinking about when we're going to present it, because we got to get it. If we're we got to decide if we're going to do virtual, if we're going to do in person, and if we're going to do in person, where we need to start scheduling those events. So we're looking ahead and trying to get ahead of that. And so that's where we will be going with the outreach committee moving forward for those next round of public outreach.
Right. So y'all will get a presentation, I think, during the consultants update on the actual outreach meetings that we did have and kind of what came from that. But we're ready. You know, I think we had a good meeting and a process, and now we're just getting ready for the next phase.
Hey, Suzanne, this is Steve Gonzalez. What time is that meeting? I don't have it on my calendar.
Well, we made the hold. I think. Hold on. The date I'm holding is 10 a.m. on the 25th of March.
Okay.
Yes, ma'am.
All right. Thank you.
Any other questions or comments for the outreach committee?
Neffy, I'm sorry. I wanted to ask a question of Derek just real quick on the
Yes, of course.
what was discussed on the climate change component of the technical committee's work. If you wouldn't mind elaborating a bit on that, please.
Yeah, Derek, I'll step in. So Suzanne, what we talked about was the use of, so we've gone through and one of the things is the Water Development Boards is going to be approving our process once they, so what you kind of heard is we've had a preliminary approval to move forward. That made sure we were administratively complete with the January 7th submittal. But it hasn't been technically reviewed yet. And one of the things that they're going to specifically be looking at is our approach to future floodplains. And so that approach to future floodplains, and I'm talking to a lot of other groups just trying to figure out where we kind of sit in that. And for the most part, most of the future floodplains that have been developed based on a buffer like we used. But that buffer ranged widely on how they decided to do it. And so we based it off of a study that was done for the River Authority on future climate change and future rainfall predictions. We took that rainfall prediction and HDR actually did a study or is completing a study for the River Authority to look at what that will look like 20, 40, 50 years down the road. And so we're looking at the 30-year future. So we extrapolated that would be a 35% increase in flows. And so we put that 35% increase in flows to several RAS models throughout the region that we got off the D2MR website. And that we did some averages on floodplain top width for the area. And it was pretty neat exercise just to see how it came out different. And we presented in there what the different top widths were that we were going to use, and it seemed to be on par with what a lot of the other regions were using. So it was one of those checkpoints we wanted to make sure, because we had to finalize it. That's the future floodplains is something we're turning in this March 7th deliverable, and so we wanted to make sure that we had that approved and through. So I think we used a little bit different approach than a lot of the other regions, but I think it had a little bit more basis. I want to think that it had a little bit more basis. I think it's still a swag, it's still an estimate, and per that committee, we did add to all the maps. All future floodplains are for regional flood planning purposes only and not intended for regulation. So, and that we're making sure that's going to be on the website and anything else we put out. So that's how we use that.
Are you going to show an example of that today that we could see, or did you send that out to us? I know there was a GIS layer that you sent, I think. Was it in that?
Are you talking the future floodplain?
Yeah, I'm just trying to get a sense if that's going to be submitted in the March 7th submittal. I was just wondering if we were going to see that here today, at least an example of what that means in a map somewhere that we could understand.
Yes, it's in the packet. It's in the packet.
Thank you.
So Ron, just to be clear, for my sake, so the discussion on climate change really had to do with the development or our approach to develop the future floodplain data set. Got it. Okay. Thank you.
Yeah, it wasn't an approval of a methodology for, it was saying what's the best available data. And to us, it seemed like, you know, we had these two reports that were going to give us a lot of data. We do understand that as we discussed in there, you know, there was a lot of discussion, what makes this climate report, you know, any different from the others, or what make this one, and, you know, and I think it was kind of said, yeah, we are throwing mud against the wall to try to figure this out. But I think that there isn't a defined process for the Water Development Board. They're leaving it open to the group. And so this is what we went.
Yeah, and further that discussion, we had a lot of talk about the lack of conformity among the different flood planning groups. There's not a specific methodology by which we're projecting out into the future. What's this future floodplain going to look like? I think there needs to be some template, something to work by that everybody can be utilizing the same type of data, just from a conformity standpoint. I know we discussed it at the technical group meeting and said we would bring it up at the at this larger group.
Certainly. Anita, I don't know if you got if you took that note of, you know, we feel the importance of having some conformity across the state with regard to the approach. I know, and to the credit of the Water Board, they've identified a few methods that are acceptable. So I think for the credit of them, I mean, they certainly have done that, and I think, but certainly the regions may be a little bit different. But please, if you could share that, our interest in finding a little bit more conformity across the state. I for one am happy that we are talking about this, and unlike some of our previous lessons learned of designing things for today, the simple fact that we're considering a future floodplain as a planning tool moving forward, I think makes a lot of sense. And I appreciate you guys making it clear that it is for planning. For regulatory, it would require something a whole different level. But for our planning, I really appreciate the fact that we're looking at this at this point. Any other comments or questions for the technical subcommittee or the outreach subcommittee? Hearing none, we have a real treat today. Debbie has been so kind enough to invite a speaker that is going to share with us some really interesting information. Debbie, I'm gonna let you introduce our speaker who has been patiently waiting. And so thank you for allowing us to go through all this business. And now, Debbie, I'm going to turn it over to you to give an introduction, and then we can begin.
As we transition, I'd like to remind all of our voting members to turn their cameras on, please. Thank you. Debbie, go ahead.
Thank you. I wanted to reach out to David Skudos because in the Mile High Flood District, they are dealing with some of the exact same issues that we are. And they're taking an innovative approach, I feel like, and really considering it as a system process, including many different factors as how they design their future flood control. And I'm really looking forward to having this opportunity for David to share some of their lessons learned and where they're headed. Thank you so much. And for your patience, changing the day, changing the time. Thank you.
Oh, you're welcome. Thanks for having me. Can I get a confirmation you guys can hear me? Great, thank you. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. Can you guys see the PowerPoint? Great. So just a little window into my day today. My daughter, my third grader, is home and off from school. I have a contractor working in my basement, and I have a dog who always sits at the ready for any time an Amazon delivery comes. So let's just keep our fingers crossed that the next 20 to 30 minutes are without incident. But thanks so much to Debbie for inviting me to join you today. Again, I'm Dave Skudos. I'm a civil engineer by training, and I work as the director for design, construction, and maintenance at the Mile High Flood District. I work with a staff of around 24 to implement around $75 million worth of infrastructure and maintenance projects each year. So that keeps us pretty busy. For those that are unfamiliar, we are a special district that encompasses the greater metro Denver area. So we're not county or state. Our funding comes from a mill levy on property taxes. And we facilitate the rhyme and reason to how our urban waterways are managed as they cross 40 city and county boundaries along around 3,500 miles of major drainage ways. We work on floodplain mapping, master planning, flood warning systems, capital construction, and maintenance. We also work with our local governments on land development. This black areas on this map here are all the yet to be developed parcels. This is where we have the chance to avoid creating some of the problems from past land use and infrastructure decisions, which is the focus of this talk. We want to avoid situations like this where neighborhoods were built where they shouldn't have. We get flood risk that looks like this, which then looks like this when it comes to fruition, like it did in 2013. I like to tell people my job is to keep floods outdoors, and this is why. Mitigating for this type of flood risk is quite the burden for taxpayers and the people living there. In our land use and infrastructure decisions, they're generally intended to make our communities better, but they can actually make our communities worse off if we're too short-sighted or too narrow in our thinking. And I've basically made a 20-year career out of building capital improvement projects to mitigate for land use decisions and to address failing or undersized infrastructure. Projects like this one along Wonderland Creek. It took 10 years and cost $30 million. Or this one along the Hoffman Drainage Way, it was 20 years, $8 million. Or this retrofit storm drain, 15 years, $10 million to stick a pipe in the ground and bury it. Now, mitigation projects are messy and expensive in every way you can imagine. And so developers, they may pay to install public infrastructure, but the local governments, we generally inherit it. And think about all of the pavement, the water lines, the sewer lines, the parks, you know, the list goes on. And the same thing goes for projects funded by the feds. They may help us build infrastructure, but they aren't really around to help us maintain it. Now, I'm not personally aware of any federal grants for infrastructure maintenance. And so our cities often develop in ways that are really inefficient from a long-term maintenance standpoint. So when all that shiny new infrastructure falls apart, there may not be enough local government funding to repair it or in some cases replace it. And so taxes generated from certain types of land use may not create enough revenue for the local community to someday pay for replacing the infrastructure supporting that land use. So perhaps a community does take in some additional taxes from new developments, and maybe there are even impact fees. But what if those funding inputs aren't enough to pay for the deferred maintenance or replacements, you know, the costs? It starts looking like credit card debt, which in many ways it is, because the cost of maintenance and replacement goes up over time, kind of like paying interest on your credit card. A specific example of this happened in Omaha, Nebraska, where the city inherited a number of developer constructed roads, some of which were substandard. And the city eventually ran into a shortage of funds for their citywide pavement maintenance program. And in some locations, the city was actually forced to pulverize some of the failing roads, essentially converting them into dirt roads. And as you can imagine, that wasn't a popular outcome for residents like this fellow. I think he chose the wrong day to wear white sneakers, which is probably every day when you live on that particular road. And the more structural a piece of infrastructure is, the more expensive it will be to someday replace. In Denver, a glaring example is the Central 70 project. So several miles of I-70 were built as a viaduct back in the 1960s, and they must not have had the land to do anything simpler or less structural at the time because of the narrow corridor. So now we have this massive project to reconstruct this entire section of interstate, to widen it and lower it, and to place a lid over the top of sections of it. So it's evolved into this $1 billion with a B project. It's very political, lots of riot picketing and very energetic public meetings. And while we could argue the merits of the design approach, what can't be argued is that the old viaduct was in disrepair and needed replacement. It only lasted around 50 years, and its condition was way past being an issue of maintenance. It's now another capital project on the same stretch of road 50 years later because of prior land use and infrastructure decisions that led to this outcome. So it's important to think long-term about land use and infrastructure decisions we're making today because they tend to be pretty permanent. Our decisions outlast us and they get handed down to our professional successors. So long-term thinking, and I think this plays into some of the conversation you guys were just having, is why in Denver, we map floodplains using future land use conditions for our hydrology, because we know that developing land will increase runoff, and we don't want to remap floodplains every time a parcel develops. We're a cooperating technical partner with FEMA, and they allow us to do this as a regulatory tool, as long as the future developed flows are no more than 30% greater than existing hydrology. That's something we do here. So we map the floodplains with the future in mind. We also spend a fair amount of time trying to change mental models. This is a hard thing to do. So what are mental models? Mental models are the assumptions, generalizations, and other filters that underline how we interpret situations we come across. So our interpretation helps shape our response or action. So if I say the word dog, most of you will have an idea, a feeling, or a picture that enters your brain, and that's your mental model of a dog. Well, when I think of a dog, I think of my cute little fur baby, Rosie. There she is. So a positive mental model. Conversely, I have a friend who hates dogs. And that's because she grew up in a tough neighborhood with lots of guard dogs she had to walk past to get to school. So this is her mental model of a dog, which is quite different than mine, of course, but founded on her experience. Well, in my work, I often interact with open space folks, and some open space professionals, when they hear the term flood control, this is their mental model. And maybe that's the mental model for some of you. It's no judgment here, okay? And I can't say I blame you. Engineers like me built these projects because they move a heck of a lot of water. But here is a side-by-side contrast of this same creek on the same day within a mile, showing how much different we build flood control today, at least in Denver. These are the same creek on the same day. I flew these with my drone. It was kind of fun. But the mental model of the imagery on the left explains why some communities don't allow new developments to count any of the floodplain towards their open space credit. So if drainage ways look like a box culvert without a lid on it, I get it. That doesn't really look like open space. But clearly, our modern design approach can be an asset to open space. Here, we're making infrastructure that looks like nature. And what's better for open space than a healthy flowing stream, especially in the middle of a city? So it's a problem when a developer can't count any of this wider floodplain. This is the same creek that I was showing you in that video. So it's a problem when the developer can't count any of the wider floodplain on the right towards their open space credit. It makes them resistant to a natural design approach because it takes more space. They end up losing lots. So here we have code based on an outdated mental model, at least in Denver. And this is why it's also important to think beyond your own expertise or department. And since I'm talking to folks out of state, I got to say, go Broncos. We had a good once when Peyton was there. It's been a while. So if we want better outcomes, then we need to embrace inclusion. So if we only know about one little niche of a complex city government or government agency, then it stands to reason we'll achieve better outcomes if we recruit people from other departments or disciplines. So let's say that this is a city government and you've got parks and public works and planning, and you've got police and social services, finance, legal. So in the example I just shared, if development code is being updated, then it needs to be an inclusive process, but inclusion, it works both ways. So for engineers like me, I don't typically dabble with writing land use code, but if an opportunity to participate comes up, then I need to pony up and help. And the higher the stakes of your project, the more impactful it will be, the more inclusion you need to plan on having. But inclusion can be really important in small things too. So as an example, there was a a planning department for a local community that required developers to plant trees in landscape medians. And trees are great. I like trees, but here's what would happen. When they got too large, right-of-way maintenance crews would cut them all down because they interfered with maintenance. And this is one of those times where different groups within the city should probably talk. When it comes to medians, do we want beautification or maintenance? Could we maybe pick some smaller trees and have both? Sometimes we can have both. And I was part of the design team for the Wonderland Creek I mentioned earlier. And one thing I'm happy we did as a design team was we asked maintenance staff who plow snow along the trails for input on the design. We have to plow the trails here in Colorado because of the snow. And some of them get treated as nicely as the roads do, depending on the trail. So this was a brand new stretch of regional trail. And so we asked, how could we adjust the trail, the railings, the walls to make plowing easier? It's got these equipment, like how big is your equipment? Is it on a truck? Is it on an ATV? How big is your blade? These sorts of questions. The changes ended up being a few feet here and there and didn't really cost much extra, but it created more long-term value because we thought to ask. And so asking for input for maintenance staff is easy to do, but it's also easy not to do, right? And so it takes intention and forethought. Okay, we also should consider the full life cycle cost of our infrastructure. One of the services we provide at the Mile High Flood District is long-term maintenance of our urban waterways. And we've been around for over 50 years, and we've learned a lot about life cycle costs because we get to deal with our own prior infrastructure decisions and the consequences of whether those were good ones or not. And so I did a financial analysis recently of some sites around the metro area, and this gets back to the issue I brought up earlier. I wanted to know, will the revenue generated from the adjacent land use pay to maintain the infrastructure serving it? And so let's look at a few examples that attempt to answer this question. These are really short and sweet. So here we're looking at a stream called Lena Gulch, and to allow for more property to be developed, the stream was shoved into this rectangular concrete channel section. So yeah, that's technically a creek. The channel was built this way to allow for a few extra commercial buildings that you see here. I looked into how much this property is worth, and with a little math, was able to figure out that we get around $400 in revenue from this property each year. I looked at what it would cost to fully replace all of the concrete someday, and I'd ask you guys to take some guesses, but you'll never guess. It would take 17,000 years for us to build up enough funding from the revenue from this property to pay to replace the channel infrastructure that was put there in this way really to benefit how that land developed. And I'm not making that up. I did the math myself. Now let's look at a couple other locations because it's not always quite that bad. Here we're at the Maxwell tributary. It's a concrete lined channel that sits in the street median, and it's quite undersized, so the road is used for conveyance here. The real estate in the watershed adjacent to the channel is worth over $200 million, which allows us to collect around $10,000 a year. So if we just replace the channel lining and exclude all the culverts like you see here, it would still take us over 600 years to build up enough funding from this neighborhood to pay for the replacement. In the meantime, we patch it when it breaks and hope it holds together. At this final location along Newland Gulch, we are in a more open channel, but it's still fairly trapezoidal and with some really large grade control structures. I mean, look at how big that thing is, all that rock, compared to the houses on the right or that playing field on the left. Now, the property in this watershed adjacent to the creek is worth over $760 million, allowing us to collect around $38,000 a year. And it would still take us over 300 years to build up the funding to replace the 25 grade control structures in this part of the stream. I hope they last 300 years, but I wouldn't bet on it. So what we find is that much of our ability to create longer lasting, more resilient, lower maintenance stream infrastructure rests on the amount of land we have to work with. In this aerial comparison, it shows how stark this contrast can be. These images were taken from the exact same altitude for streams that convey a similar amount of water. So when land use decisions force us to confine our streams, the water flows faster and deeper, putting more stress on the bed and banks. And this explains the history of building concrete lined channels around the country. The concrete is necessary to withstand the depth and velocity of flow caused by the confinement. And you think of how the water speeds up on your garden hose when you stick your thumb over the end. And the same principle applies here. You shrink the area, the water moves faster. Now, this sort of design is actually pretty low maintenance until one day when it's not. Just like with the Central 70 project, when infrastructure like this someday falls apart, it's really expensive and can be awkward to maintain or replace. I found this photo on the internet somewhere and I saved it for just this occasion. I don't know how they're going to get to the rest of it. I figure they got to wait for that part underneath them to cure, and then they'll get to those gaps in between. I don't know. There's a story there and I need to know it. I don't know it. Okay, so then when we open the banks up a bit, whoops, we need less rock and concrete, but in this photo, we're still looking quite structural, and structures like this are prone to failure. This is an example where a big sinkhole formed under a structure like that. On this next one, we're doing a little better. You start to see less structure, more green, and then on this last photo, along Westerly Creek, this is more of the ideal situation where we've given the stream plenty of room and we don't need to import nearly as much rock and concrete. And interestingly, this is an engineered channel that used to sit under the runways of the old Stapleton Airport. Sometimes we don't have the room to do this, but this is the ideal. With space for flood flows to spread out, resilience is achieved with healthy vegetation instead of a bunch of rock or concrete. And it looks like open space. Bonus. So but how does it hold up to floods? Does this hold up? Do we have to go out and maintain this every time we get a big flood? Well, here's a photo of the same creek a little further downstream, and keep an eye on that bridge. Here is the exact same view at the height of the 2013 flood. So this was definitely a 100-year plus flood on this creek. This next photo is of the very next day, and then back to the first photo, which was actually taken 8 months after the flood. So there was nothing to fix here, just some debris to clean up. No search and rescue helicopters or anything like that even. It was a spectator event. A person took the photo of that flood from a bridge on a nearby road. So long-term maintenance here involves weed whackers and trash bags rather than heavy earth-moving equipment, because there really isn't anything to fix. So we get to play the role of urban gardeners. And green infrastructure like this gets stronger over time as the vegetation matures, whereas gray infrastructure is strongest the day it's installed and gets weaker every day after. In the future, we want to influence land use patterns further out into the watershed. We don't want to just deal with the increase in runoff all in the receiving stream. We think we could avoid these expensive stream restoration projects altogether if the land were developed in a way that avoids increasing runoff. These old school approaches cut off all these smaller first order tributaries, turning them into gray curb gutter and storm drains. And so if you were to shift, sometimes traditional site planning is just because it's easier and everybody's used to it. You can get an approval, you can deal with your MS4 or whatever sort of permits. But if you were to shift from a traditional site plan like this to that kind of starts with the road network and plans around the road network first and foremost, switching that to the one on the right, which is a dendritic or tree-like one where you honor the natural topography a little better, we could reduce or almost eliminate the increase in runoff caused by development. We actually did the math, and the site layout on the right actually yields a similar number of lots to the layout on the left. And we did the math. It reduces runoff, and the stream could potentially be left in its natural state and not just erode like crazy because of urbanization. But here's the thing, at the flood district, we can like this idea all we want, but we need to seek feedback from our initial pilot projects and be ready to course correct. We need to have a sense of inclusion because changing traditional site planning needs to work for developers, planners, and even the market for potential home buyers. Will they like it? And we need to ponder what this layout means for long-term upkeep and maintenance. Will it age well? So just a couple other quick hitters before I close. I'm almost done here. is one helpful tool we use in Denver is that we define a major drainage way as having a tributary of 130 acres or more. Well, why is that? Well, it's because someone did the math and figured out this is the threshold where typical pipe and gutter flow criteria gets exceeded in the major storm. And so at greater than 130 acres, we require open channel because it's better and safer and more functional infrastructure. We also map something we call a stream management corridor, because a stream isn't a line, it's a corridor. I heard that quote somewhere and it stuck with me. And so this is a management tool for working with new development primarily, but we pretty much mapped every drainage way in the district. The simplest version it gets interesting with them sometimes, I'll just say that. We've also coined a new term called high functioning and low maintenance streams, or HEFLMs. If we could think of a better acronym, we would, but that's what we got. This is a philosophy that informs our approach to urban stream design. And so with hydrology, we look for runoff reduction wherever we can get it, even at the site scale. We design for the hydraulics needed to keep people safe. We consider the geomorphology to see what a sustainable naturalized channel could look like. And we incorporate site-specific vegetation and community values to provide function for the 99% of the time when there is no flood. And we even have a local engineer writing a doctoral dissertation about this approach, so we'll see where he gets with that. But ideally, it looks like the photo on the right there, like God created that stream instead of it actually being an engineered channel within a corridor we preserved as land developed around it. You know, achieving this sort of outcome takes a fair amount of inclusion and planning for it early as the site is being laid out. We want this corridor preservation predictable for developers because they're not fond of surprises, as it were. We apply this philosophy on mitigation projects too. The idea is to get as much function as we can get out of a site given the context and site constraints we're working with. And so it's hard to argue this isn't an improvement upon this, On this next one, we got really creative and used a naturalized channel for frequent storms on top and then a buried box culvert for flood conveyance underneath that gets rarely used. It's kind of, we like to call it a drainage mullet. It's function on top and conveyance on bottom. And lastly, I hope you've enjoyed this deep dive into the Mile High Flood District's approach to land use and infrastructure. And with a shameless bit of self-promotion, I'll tell you, I wrote a book about why it matters to be a good client in the construction industry, and it's full of anecdotes about working in water. So if you're ever looking for a keynote to bring in for a conference, let's talk. So thank you for having me. I'm around for questions if you have time.
David, thank you so much for the presentation. Great slides. Questions from the committee?
Well, I'll just say thanks.
Questions. Come on, you guys got to have questions.
Well, this is Suzanne. I'll just say that was just an incredible presentation. And I know that, we've done, obviously, we've done some of that here. The River Authority has done some of that here in San Antonio, but I do think that you've brought up a lot of good points going forward. And I really appreciate Debbie bringing you to us today to show us these techniques that you've used. So thank you. It was very interesting.
Yeah, thanks for having me. We don't have it all figured out, but we're trying to get there.
I think we need to take a field trip. Let's go to Denver. Well, certainly some good ideas. If there isn't any other questions, we'll move on to the next item on the agenda. Once again, thank you, David, for your patience and the great presentation.
Thanks for having me.
Moving on to the next item on the agenda, item 8, discussion and appropriate action regarding the submission of March 7th technical memorandum supplemented Texas Water Development Board. Ron?
Sure, thanks, Neff. Going to go through quick agenda here real quick. We're going to talk about a few things. We did mention our schedule, and so that our critical path is get to meet to this March 7th, and we're going to update the draft technical memo and the geodatabase that are due on Monday. And then our next steps, as mentioned earlier, we'll be starting to coordinate future meetings for the outreach, as well as meeting with the technical committee to start getting into those FMEs, FMPs, and FMSs. So, but we'll update the critical path next time to get to August. So the next run will get there. A quick little outreach update. So we had a virtual meeting on February the 7th, and I think it went really well from a meeting standpoint. I can't say that we've had just a whole lot of success with that. The meeting was, we had the meeting, we held, we asked for the comments for 1 week. The presentation is still online. I have a copy here. It's found on the webpage, region12texas.org. We put it up there. And so at this point, we've concluded all of our public outreach, and Linda's putting together an outreach report that we should have. Again, you can see all the comments that were made on our comment map, and we're still happy to take further comments. And if we get some comments in, we could possibly take them, but we'll have to really see what they are moving forward in order to get those comments. Future comments can always be included in future plans, and we'll continue to track those and keep those as we get them in from that. A little bit on the technical memo, I think. So in a couple pages back in your packet after this presentation, we received a notice on January the 26th from the Water Development Board requesting a little bit more information. What they had requested was an entity list, including all of the entities with flood regulatory jurisdiction. So that it was a little bit of misinterpretation on my part. I included, I thought flood jurisdiction in the natural sense as being NFIP. And so we included the NFIP cities, and they said, no, we gave you a list. We want to see all of them. So even the groundwater districts, they have some. So all of those were included. So we had the information. We just, when we heard regulatory jurisdiction, we interpreted that wrong. So we turned that around, and we sent that back on February the 4th. That's in their packet. And the entity list that you see behind that letter is the entity list I mentioned earlier that we're reaching out to. So if you see anybody on that list that that we need to reach out to get FMEs, FMPs, and FMSs, then please make us aware. But since we published the agenda, we received a letter that Neffy mentioned that giving us permission to move forward onto task 5 through 10, 5 through 9. So that was a little bit on the tech memo to that point. So now we're going to talk about the March 7th deliverable. You received in your packet the draft technical memo, and so we updated the memo per the Texas Water Development Board comment. We updated the maps and appendices with the new information, and we've even updated the tech memo that's on the story map. And one other piece of information that we added there was we added the information about the future floodplains, the top width. So all of that can be seen in the technical memo that was provided earlier. Those were the changes, very minor changes since the draft in January. Again, this is still a draft. This is still a snapshot in time. This is all rolling into the report that's due, the draft report that's this summer. So the changes were minor on that on that aspect. It was more towards the geodatabase and updating some of the maps. And so the geodatabase is complete, and we can go through the draft checklist. But Kendall, can you bring up the email I sent with the agenda or with the appendices, and we can actually, if you can go down. This is the latest report that we will be submitting. It had a couple of minor changes. It was mainly the maps at the end, and Kendall, I think it's Appendix A2, I believe, if I'm not mistaken. It's a big one, so it's taking some time. It's the maps, yeah. So I just wanted to go through the key parts of the maps that were kind of produced. And again, all the maps that we have can be seen in more detail. You can zoom in and do a lot more on the story map on the link that was provided.
And Kendall, there might be bookmarks in this Adobe. I know it works for Bluebeam, but.
Yeah. Thank you, Ludovine. So a few of the maps that we're required to have. So this is and I know you love how big that is, Neffy. I know that your good eyes, the eagle eyes, can tell the difference there. But this is the existing floodplain that you have seen. This is part of the maps that we have to produce. And again, if you really want to dig into it, the story map is definitely the way to look at it, to get into that. I think the future, I think the future, we provided the geodatabase and we've had it up on the story map for a while. And I think Erin's had at least a chance to look maybe through the existing, right? I think through the existing, she looked through that just to kind of see what's going. And again, all this information, all this, if we find a mistake or we find things that aren't right, it's preliminary. It's a snapshot in time. But this is the existing. We have 5 maps for each of the locations, and you can keep scrolling down through those. There's the San Antonio or Bexar County area, Wilson Carnes, and then the coastal counties. And that's just the existing. So then this is the exposure map. This is a heat map with the existing exposure. This is coming straight from the Water Development Board processes. We're looking at what might be harmed to the exposure. There are a number of factors in the structure. It's the number of structures in the floodplain, the population, the day and night, roadway, stream crossings, agriculture areas, and critical facilities. And so this heat map is talking about our exposure. This is the exposure map that you can see. And I think we were surprised. Erin even made the comment she was surprised to see the exposure that far down in the basin. And I think that's mostly driven by low water crossings and what you're seeing there.
I think just looking at the database, it also looks like agriculture gets a lot of points for an area. It gets converted into a lot of points. So is that filtered out, or like how does the things that are getting impacted by flooding, how do those get lumped into this density? Is it based on those points, or are they weighted in any way? And is that are you just told how to do it by the board and you just run that?
Yeah, this process is we were given the process by the board, and it's just stacking it and weighing it. And so it's not really broken out. It's the way when we go through these and clip them and join them and go through that process. And we have an actual process I can share with you on how we develop that through that code and give you that to see where that came from, to see the background on that.
Ron, I would have, this is kind of an interesting map. I found it kind of interesting, and it actually supports some of the studies and exercise on resilience that the city of San Antonio has been doing, because I really would have thought I would see a lot more red within Bexar County, but it doesn't seem to be as much. I mean, there's certainly pockets of it. And let me remind you that some of the red that you see there is really associated with structures in the floodplain, structures that were built before 1970, before FEMA established the floodplain. And that is consistent with what we've seen. Those are some of the areas, we've developed heat maps for our community. That's consistent. And it's always interesting to me, if you look in areas that have been developed post 1970, and even into areas that have been developed here recently where we regulate to the 100-year future conditions, you start seeing less of that risk. So that map color illustrate that, but yeah, it's certainly an interesting map. I'd like to dig in a little bit more into that.
Yeah, and with those, I'll try to get a little bit more information out to the group so y'all can see on what exactly I'll get you more information on the actual process used and what the layers that came out of that. And as part of the exposure and vulnerability, there's a whole table that comes out of that: number of critical infrastructures, the number of low water crossings, the number of dams inundated, the number of parcels, and so different things. So there's a table with a lot of interesting numbers that come out of it, and a lot of data that gets populated because of that. But that's the heat map. I think the next one is the vulnerability map. On the next map, that's the existing conditions. Kind of meets the same thing, right? And this is the vulnerabilities of communities and critical facilities based on the social vulnerability index. The social vulnerability index was set by the Water Development Board. It wasn't set by the planning team. So again, see a similar outcome there.
Ron, question on the heat maps: can you remove layers and still have the thermal image?
Yeah, I mean it's
So you could remove the agriculture and then see what's left, so you can get a sense of the impact of each of those layers.
Yeah, I mean we could run the process. It's a lengthy process for
Okay.
it was a couple days of the processing in order, because of the amount of GIS information that we had to do this, to get it, to clean it up, to do it. It's probably a couple of day effort to take something out and put something back in, but we can definitely look at the impact of agriculture on this. So that was all the existing, I believe, and I think now we get into the proposed maps. I think this was on the next map. Yep, future flood hazard. Top right, again, the disclaimer. Just want to point that out. As we go down, and it's very hard to see, and the buffer, you would think that it was going to be a lot of difference, right? So to step back a little bit, the 100-year future floodplain was set to the existing 500. That was a criteria we decided. So then we buffered these floodplains. You're looking at a buffer of about 70 to 80 feet on either side for most of the watershed. And it's increasing the top width by roughly 150 feet. And you would think you could see it a lot more at this scale, but at this scale, it's just not really discernible. And it's going to be one of those where the story map is the best way to see it. And in the tech memo, we have the top widths that we used to create these. Again, most of them are 70 to 80 feet, except for the Medina. We saw much smaller on the Medina, but it makes a lot of sense when you if you've been out to the Medina, it's a lot steeper out there in a lot of areas. So that top width it's 40 feet on either side, so a total top width of about 80. So it's even less discernible on those maps. So it's a little tough to see, but it's there. Again, we did produce the maps. We have the maps. suggest if you want to look at them in more detail, go to the story map. And
Hey,
again,
this is Suzanne.
and Neffy or Dave, if y'all want any of the information, it is in the geodatabase that we can provide.
Right.
Yes, Suzanne?
Suzanne has a question.
Yeah, I'm sorry. So yeah, it is hard to kind of get us to understand this. Can try to go to the story map, but I guess with the study that the River Authority has done that fed into this, is there, are they identifying, damage centers that they feel because of this future condition, again, planning only purpose, not regulatory, that there are certain areas based on this calculation that are adding to the damage centers that are already there? Are there new damage centers? I'm just trying to get a sense of how this is tying to the watershed planning work that's already been done, identifying damage centers, and then how this adds to it. So to be more prospective, proactive about addressing the potential. So is that going to be in the future watershed planning efforts? Thank you.
So as part of how we're using it, the future floodplains, in a few more maps here, you'll see the vulnerability and the exposure, and you can see there's some slight changes. That's how we use it. Plus, it's part of the way that we will evaluate. It's part of what we have to evaluate as part of FMPs, FMEs, and FMSs. So yes, in a way, the projects that we predict have to have an impact to the 100-year future, or have to have an improvement to the 100-year, 500-year future. Floodplains can't make it worse, that kind of thing. So I think that'll be part of the scoring, right? I mean, you can see that being weighted. Part of what you're talking about, Neffy, is like the value in planning for the future floodplains. I'm sure if you improve the existing but don't have much of an effect to the future, may not score as high as if you have this. I don't know how the scoring is going to come out, but I would have to feel that would be something in a way that they would score it. So no, Suzanne, I don't think we're going to go in here and develop a new or expand on any of the damage centers that were identified with the master plans. The master plan projects are probably, it's kind of the city bases their projects, the county bases their projects on that, and Sarah has some more, and we're going to include those probably in our FME, FMP, and FMS list. And so we will be evaluating those and how those look in the future floodplains. So hopefully that answers your question, Suzanne.
Yeah, I guess I can ask, offline. I'm just trying to if we're trying to look, again, to try to mitigate the impact of future, I just didn't know if that was going to be, sort of added to those watershed master plans as they're updated.
This is Erin. We plan to look at the future conditions information in the master plans, but not necessarily map them as floodplains the way the board is requiring for this effort.
And that is specific to the master planning work that the River Authority is doing? Okay. Independent of this. Okay. Any other question for Ron?
So we can keep going on the map.
Perfect.
The thing is, the board has the geodatabase, and I'm sure that's how they're going to review it, right? Probably not in these maps, but the map is this is one of the maps that's required for submittal. So you can keep going. Again, see
This map is on page 56.
and kind of going through. Okay. Yes, we got into the future. These last couple maps You don't have. These are the updated ones. Sorry, I forgot that we're looking at different ones. These are two more that we didn't have at the time of the agenda. And so these are the kind of the ones that we were talking about, Derek, that we needed to produce yet. So the future you have, but these last two, there was one in the future there. I'm going to take one step back. So yeah, so the exposure and vulnerability and the comparison were done after we made after the agenda, and so these are the last two. These are the maps that we have to. These are the maps that we have to provide as part of the checklist that we went through, and so I just wanted to be able to say I went over the tech memo with you and showed you the changes, showed you the maps that were going to be produced. And then I can show you the checklist real quick if you have a question now.
Yeah, so this map is the same exercise as the existing, except you're running it with the future floodplain conditions. So we should see something similar, but maybe a little bit more intense. It's kind of what I'm seeing.
Yes. And the one thing to note here is I do know we have to go back and make a couple of updates on this one as we roll through. Once we got the Fathom data back in, got developed and started developing these maps, we realized that there were more floodplains than we had stream center lines, and so we're not capturing a couple of the low water crossings. So we will process that again. I don't anticipate it. There was some of the areas in Lower Bear County and some in Wilson where I saw the majority of that additional Fathom data that we had. That we didn't have center lines for. So we will go back and update these scores. But we wanted to make sure that we had these in there. We went through the process, and we'll be looking at these some more as we finalize them. But these are the maps that will go in the report. These are the maps that are required by the board. And so we're making sure we're hitting all the checklists.
And to confirm, this information is on the storyboard. So if we want to get into really looking into it, storyboard's going to be the best place to.
That's my recommendation, to really get in and look at that. And also,
yeah. So let me put a plug in for this.
Maps, the existing and vulnerability may still need to be published as far as pushed out there, but all the other maps we've looked at up at this point.
Let me put in a plug for that for our committee, especially our voting members. Please make concerted effort to go to that site, learn, understand what's going on, particularly with this information, and please be prepared to ask Ron questions as we move forward, because I think this is really, really critical as we start defining some of these things. And I want to make sure that we're capturing everything, because even here, Derek and I were just looking at it. It was really interesting to see there are areas that are being highlighted here that I really didn't think we would, but obviously there's something in the data that's being captured. So let's make sure and do our homework on this one.
Yeah, and if there are areas you want me to dig into, Neffy, just, again, that's perfect example. We'll dig into it and tell you, hey, the reason this is red is because there's a lot of agriculture area. There's a critical infrastructure, several critical infrastructures and things like that. So if you have areas that you're concerned about or have questions about, we're more than happy.
Yeah, and I anticipate that's going to happen, because I think just by looking at the map, it kind of brings in a question. So give us a chance to do a little homework, and then I'm sure we'll come back.
And for Derek and for Neffy, your organizations, Dave, if you again, all of that information when it's populated, that's all in the attribute table, right? And you'll be able to see that if you load that with the geodatabase. If you load that into your, bring that up into GIS, Erin will be able to look at it and understand it. Where she'll be able to see a lot better of the process just by opening up the map and seeing what's identified. So if you have anybody in your organizations you want to go through it, the Water Development Board will have the geodatabase. Sarah has the geodatabase, and we can make it available. We have it on OneDrive. It's pretty easy to transfer.
Ron, one of the things that I'm interested in, I'm gonna really be paying attention is some of these vulnerabilities, and overlay on top of that some of the data that you have previously published with regard to fatalities and injuries that are included in this data set. It's going to be really interesting to see where we've had fatalities and what is the current risk of that. In other words, what are we doing about it? If there has been a fatality, are we actually doing something? Has there improvements been done? I think that's going to be an interesting comparison of data.
Awesome. So moving on, page 122. This is the requirements by the Water Development Board for the next submittal. And as you can see, it's the existing feature. It's the existing flood hazard. So we've gone through that. We've showed you that. The flood, the feature class is the flood map gaps. We have no flood maps. We haven't identified where there's any gaps in mapping. I think through future mapping, I think that there's going to be areas where you may see some things get extended, but I don't think that there's a gap in anything that we have at this time. And I think with BLE, with the inclusion of BLE data and some of the future things that the River Authority is doing, I think those maps are going to expand more and more. But I can't say that we identified areas where we think we have stream sections missing or any of that. So I've identified no gaps. Then there's the existing flood exposure polygon, line, and point. And the polygons cover the things like the public comment, parcel data, and then the line is low water crossings. It's the things that were identified as line work, and then the points can be dams, sinkholes, different things. So all of that is added up. Then we get in, then the exposure, all of those are included. And then we get in number 7 is the future flood hazard, which is we discussed. And then the exposure points, lines, and polygons in the same manner. And then all of it. Then the map. So as you can see, map 4 is the existing condition. We provided that. Map 5 is the gaps in inundation, and so we didn't have anything there, so we wanted to give a submission note. And the San Antonio River Basin has extensive mapping coverage, and no areas were identified as having insufficient or outdated mapping data. No flood-prone areas were identified outside of the flood mapping boundaries. So that's what we have there. All of the other maps were going. Map 9, the future hazard gaps, same note to that. Maps 11 and 12 on submission numbers 19 and 20 were the future flood exposure and the vulnerability and critical infrastructure. The last few things are the existing flood hazard, and it was the same thing. And this was asking for flood-prone areas not described or hydrologic that aren't hydrologic features, historic flooding, or local knowledge. That would have been something that would be, I think, is very unique. Maybe it's something different in each region, but I think there wasn't anything that we saw out there that wasn't identified. So if you think that there's anything that doesn't fall into a hydrologic feature, historic flooding, and or local knowledge, that's not there, please let us know. But we didn't find anything there. And then the gaps in inundation boundaries, same thing. Number 23 started asking about the making maps, identifying where models are available. So I've updated this note a little bit, and basically, because when you start looking at it, the River Authority has complete model coverage for everything, because we said there's no gaps. And so we haven't identified, we didn't, some of the other regions have it a lot easier because they've made maps of their HMS models. If I did a map of the San Antonio River Basin it would just look like little dots on top of each other because of the way it looks. So we mentioned in there we have complete coverage, and we're referring them to the D2MR website to see that there's complete coverage in that. So all of the, and that's kind of what 23 and 24 allude to. What are the models that we're going to be using for to help validate the FMEs, FMPs, and FMSs? And so we refer them to the D2MR website and say, this is what we're gonna provide. Or these are the models that are out there, and we haven't identified any. One of them is asking for the models, and one of them is asking for the need for models, and we haven't identified any need for models yet. With the as we're just starting FMP, FME, and FMS's outreach. So that is the submittal that we are going to be providing to the Water Development Board. Again, it's a snapshot in time. It's a draft deliverable. We updated their comments from last time. We're providing the updated geodatabase. So at this time, Mr. Chair, I'm looking for approval of submittal of the memo as I've amended today, with a couple of additional maps and a couple of additional changes to some of the wording.
Ron, I may be looking at an outdated one, but there is an item number 24 that's not checked off. Can you explain why?
No, that was corrected. It should be.
It should be. It is checked, and it's kind of going through the same thing. It's hydrologic and hydraulic needs. It's exactly what I mentioned. It's filled in. It's checked off. It's the same thing as I updated the wording on 23 and 24 to say, look at that we do not have any gaps in floodplain or in hydrologic and hydraulic models at this time. Please refer to the D2MR website to see the complete coverage of the watershed. So
in essence, by answering 23, you're answering 24 also?
It's the same thing, yep.
Okay.
Yep.
Well, this is certainly very interesting here. Let's go ahead and put a motion on the floor, and then we can discuss this. And this is a motion to approve the San Antonio Regional Flood Planning Group Technical Memorandum Supplement and associate documentation as amended by the planning group today.
So moved.
A motion by Derek. If we can have a second.
Second, Debbie Reed.
Second by Debbie Reed. Now let's open it up to questions at this point, now that we have an actual motion on the floor. So Debbie.
Ron, you and I have talked a little bit about the hydraulic modeling that's used and its sensitivity to some of the plant soil interactions and how that may impact modeling. Is there a way to put that as a need for refining some of that on a smaller scale or whatever to give us better input on analysis, especially the analysis or of benefits or whatever from nature-based solutions?
Yeah, I mean, I don't see why there isn't a reason why you couldn't make that an FME. You know,
but wouldn't we have to make it a need on number 24?
No, I think that's more. I think what you're getting at is more of a study, right? I mean, I don't know if we want to identify. I don't know if the group wants to identify existing existing needs with the current modeling. You may want to say, hey, let's look at that as a study to see if we have an issue.
I see your point.
And let me add on a little bit to what Debbie is saying, because I think she's got an interesting point. And again, I'm only speaking of Bexar County, or at least the studies that we have been doing here. Maybe I'll turn a little bit over to Aaron, because as we're updating our FEMA maps, the hydrology transformation particularly has changed to a methodology that does allow for a little bit better calibration. So additional information as far as soils conditions and vegetations would be beneficial to these models, correct, Aaron?
To the hydraulics models, do you mean? I don't have a straightforward answer, but I think that
I'm sorry, I guess I meant the hydrology on the hydrology model with the transformation of switching to green and AMP from
Yes.
our previous SES.
So we are able to tap into an extensive database of soils data from NRCS. The Sergo soils data has a lot of data in a database that we've been able to tap into. And for, I think what we're getting towards is like a shear stress, the ability to look at the shear stress. And I think that can be done with hydraulics results and soils data in the future. I don't know if it would warrant getting to the level of modeling sediment transport in the hydraulics models, or if GIS analysis would be sufficient, but it's worth exploring as an FME. I would agree with Ron.
Thank you.
I guess I've already talked to Aaron a little bit about the ability, like the SWOT is a software, modeling software that the NRCS has developed, or USDA, but it's not at the right intervals, but it does a better job of capturing soil water and plant water balance and what role it would provide as flood mitigation. So,
That would be a big endeavor for us to recommend. I think at this time, I think it would definitely need a better study, and so that's how I would recommend moving forward to the group is possibly making that an FME and talking about a pilot study type.
right. I appreciate your input. Thank you.
Thank you, Debbie. Any additional comments or discussions on the technical memorandum and supplement as presented today? I can't see anybody attending virtually, so I don't know if I'm getting head nods over here saying like, we're good. So. All right, well, not hearing anybody speak up, then let's vote on this. We have a motion on the floor, and the motion is to approve the San Antonio Regional Flood Plan. We've had discussion, so let's vote. All in favor of, we have to have a roll call on this one. Okay, we're gonna do it by roll call, so let me turn it over to Kendall.
Dave Wegman, how do you vote?
Vote to approve.
Mr. Bays?
Approve.
Ms. Cooksey?
A. Yes.
Ms. Reed?
Approve.
Mr. Garza?
Approve.
Ms. Tackett?
Approve.
Mr. Carroll?
Approve.
Ms. Scott?
Approve.
Mr. Gonzalez?
Approve.
Mr. Mock?
Approve.
Chair Garza, the motion passes.
Thank you, Kendall. All right. Woo. We're getting it done. All right. Okay, let's move on to agenda item 9. We knew this day would come. We knew it would come. Let's talk a little bit about this. We have, as you very well know, our appointments and our ability to serve here, according to the bylaws, Article 8, Sections 1 and 2, officers and executive committee members serve a term of 1 year. It's been a year already. You believe that? Oof. Elections must be held annually with no restrictions on the number of terms. So we are required to have these elections yearly. Now, I understand we can make modifications to that, having the election, but that'll be a discussion for another day.
Yes, for the next cycle, we can make that amendment, but for the first cycle, it's annually.
Yes. So any nomination, and I hope ones are on the screen here. Can we maximize that so we can see them? I want to make sure.
You're gonna blow our heads up giant on that screen?
Because I want to see you guys when we get these commitments here. So any nominations needs to be made from the floor by voting members. The votes can be held by consensus or by affirming votes or by majority of the voting members. So I want to make sure that if there's any changes, the voting members are the ones that have to put forward the name. So let me remind you what our current officers are as of today. So currently, Chair, your servant, Nefi Garza, Vice Chair, Derek Bays, Secretary, Kara Tackett, Executives at Large, Debbie Reed, and David Wegman. That is the executive officers as they stand today.
Neffy, can I ask a question, make a comment real quick?
Sure, absolutely.
Derek was not on the same cycle as us, but can we go ahead and put him on that? Because, you know, he hasn't served a year yet, but can we put him on that same, or whoever, I mean, that role, so that we can have some, not doing this again when his year is up?
Yes, ma'am, we are allowed to do that as elections are held at the first meeting of, or the first couple meetings of the year. So we can go ahead and make that motion as well to include him in the elections.
Does that need to be a separate motion, or can all in the same motions?
No, ma'am, as long as we offer up the position of vice chair for re-election, he can be included.
Can I make a motion that we accept the slate as currently presented and just do it all in one action?
Yeah, this is Steve Gonzalez. I second that. If it's not broke, don't fix it.
And Suzanne, your motion would include Derek in that, or the vice chair in that role as well?
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yes.
Suzanne, you didn't give room for anybody else to want to become chair, huh?
That was just a preemptive strike right there.
No kidding, man. That's
He was pretty sure nobody wanted it. I mean, sorry, but.
All right, so we have a motion on the floor to continue. Do I have a second?
Absolutely. I second that.
Mr. Gonzalez already seconded
Steve
the motion.
Gonzalez had seconded. I'm sorry. Steve Gonzalez had seconded. Okay, so let's do a roll call just to.
Would you like to do a roll call?
Yes,
Chair?
please, just to.
All right, Mr. Wegman, how do you vote?
Approve.
Thank you. Mr. Bays?
Approve.
Ms. Cooksey?
Approve.
Ms. Reed?
Approve.
Chair Garza?
Approve. Approve.
Ms. Tackett?
Tough call. I guess I'm going to have to go with approved.
Mr. Carroll?
Approved.
Ms. Scott?
Approve.
Mr. Gonzalez?
I approve.
Mr. Mock?
Approve.
Thank you. Chair Garza, you may remain chair. It has passed.
Thank you. Thank you. Congratulations to you all.
You may, like it was lucky guy.
Let's move on to agenda item number 10, an update by the regional liaisons. We'll begin with Suzanne. Then we'll follow by Mr. Mock and then Kara. Suzanne?
Yes, I was not able to make the last meeting myself, but reading the minutes, it looks like they are in the same process that we are. They had to approve another member of their of the committee. Annalisa may have some detail on anything that I missed. I just was not able to attend the last meeting, but it looks like they, reelected all their officers. They're, going through a very similar process that we are right now in their process. And they also had a vacant position in their flood district, which they also filled. So I would yield the floor to Annalisa if there's something that would be more significant that needs to be mentioned.
No, not really. That's actually a good assessment. And except that I believe that the nomination is still open. We have not filled the position for
I'm sorry,
flood district. Yeah, so we're still looking for somebody.
All right,
So
thank you for that.
If you have somebody good, send them our way.
Thank you.
Thank you, Suzanne. Mr. Mock?
Yeah, their next meeting for Region 13 is the 28th, and they're going through the same process we are, so we're all pretty much mirroring each other. There's going to be a presentation at that one from one of my colleagues here. Larry Thomas is going to give them a presentation on the flood early warning system we're developing on the headwaters of the Sabinal River for that region and the system that we already have in place on the Medina. So that's all I got.
Very nice. Thank you. Kara, Ms. Tackett?
Ditto, not much to add for Region 10. I mean, they're a little ahead of us, so they're already having a little bit more detailed discussions on project criteria and things, but pretty comparable. There's a technical meeting, I think, coming up next week, but in similar place to where we are. I will say, interestingly, personally, I really don't enjoy being on the virtual end of this. I find the meetings hard. Region 10 has gotten to where almost everybody but Judge Spinrath is the chair and the sponsor, or almost everyone else is virtual and they're the only ones in the room. So I like when more of us are able to be there personally, but I found it an interesting difference in the dynamic when most of theirs is on virtual and on a camera than not. But pretty comparable things, and they're just a little bit ahead of us.
Yeah, and I don't think our region is Region 11 is going to actually allow for any more virtual participation. Is that correct, Annalisa? I think it's all now in person.
Yeah, it is going to be all in person at the GBRA headquarters at Seguin.
Yes.
Can I ask a favor of the three liaisons? As you attend the meetings, one of the things that I'm very curious about is, because obviously this is an issue, I want to make sure that there is, how things are going with communication from the public. If they're getting enough feedback and sufficient feedback. So as you're attending your meetings, would you please pay particular attention to community feedback, especially in those that are large rural communities, because I want to make sure that we have a concerted effort to do that. I know that our outreach committee is really focused on that, and I think we've done a pretty good job to get the word out. But for the liaisons, if you guys could please help me and pay a special attention to that at the next meetings, if you would, please.
Okay, I'll say in general from Region 10, it's pretty comparable. I mean, we all know it's a little more challenging to get from some of those more rural areas, as much input as we get in some of the others. Interesting, for that one, the chair is the judge from Wharton County, so he's able to solicit and engage, and he's attending the downstream meetings for them. So a little bit more engagement from his county and around, because when your judge is chair, you tend to get a little bit more. But otherwise pretty comparable in terms of not huge numbers of folks participating in the surveys. I mean, there's no surprises, I think, on anything that I'm seeing from Region 10, which is the, Lower Colorado and Lavaca.
Yeah, Region 11 had a great participation in some of their public meetings early on during the process. I mean, they had some really great attendance. I don't think they really have that much attendance at their individual meetings, like these meetings like we're having, but they did have some pretty good feedback through the early public input processes. I don't know, Annalisa, if you had something to add there. I saw you come in.
Yeah, I think I'm going to be asking for additional public meetings to be held in the evening in other areas, because our regions are all pretty large, but the one we had in Wimberley was definitely very well attended by the public.
I'd say, one of the concerns I have is, especially in the downstream counties in the coastal, the GLO studies are going on right now, and those are conducting public hearings. So there's a tremendous amount of confusion. There's also it's another public hearing overload. And so while those have different purposes of the studies and different messages, there may be value in cross attending, because I think participation will continue to drop in those areas because people don't understand why there's yet another public meeting. Didn't we just have one on flooding and drainage? It's for a different purpose, but that's all going on at the same time right now.
And Kara, I think you hit the nail on the head there, because I think that's one of the challenges that we've had, even within Bear County, because of the multiple things, you know, the city having the bond, you know, federal funding becoming available through ARPA and some other things like that. So there has been a concerted effort by many to do this outreach that I think sometimes we may be a little bit in the crosshairs there, and people may not understand and may not be. So I'm certainly seeing that. So, but please, as you go into your meetings, please keep that in mind. So any other questions for the liaisons, Ron?
Couple of things that I wanted to chime in there too. Region 13 and Region 11 both have public comment maps, Neffy, that you can go look at. They look identical to ours. So I will make sure that Kendall has those to send out to the group. I don't know about Region 10. I think that they have some sort of something similar. I don't know but I definitely can get that one too. So I'll look for those. Kara, I think you're muted.
Just jokingly saying your subs consultant should have easy access to that one.
Yeah. And then the other is, let me reach out to, we've had some communications with the GLO consultants. Let me reach out and see if there's how we can maybe bring them in. If y'all want to ask questions, hear an update from them on their process, and maybe we can get another update. It's been a couple of months since we've had an update from them and shared information, but it might be worth bringing them in so we can hear a little bit more about their process.
Certainly, Ron, I appreciate that. And that kind of leads into one of the other agenda items that we have that we can talk a little bit further. But any other questions for the liaison or anything else that they would like to add? Hearing none, let's move on to agenda item number 11, which is an opportunity, once again, the second and final opportunity for public comments at this meeting. Kendall, do we have anybody that has signed up?
No public comments have been submitted.
Thank you, Kendall. We'll move on to agenda number 12, which is a date and potential agenda items for the next meeting. Kendall?
Dave Mock, are you still interested in giving a presentation on low water crossings?
Yeah, we can get one together for you.
Thank you. Ron, in terms of schedule for next meeting, do you advise that we meet later this month or in April?
I think in light of the amount of things that need to happen and the amount of data collection that we need to do, I would recommend that the subcommittees meet in this month and we meet in April.
Yeah, because I think it's going to start getting really heavy on the both technical and, well, certainly on the subcommittee. So I want to make sure that they have ample time to.
The technical committee is tentatively scheduled right now for March 24th at 1 o'clock. At 1. Which is probably going to be a fairly heavy lift starting the screening. Is that a fair assessment, Ron? Or reviewing the screening?
We're going to start talking about that, but there's some things we need to kind of go back on to, right? There's the goals, right? We left the metrics open on the goals. We got to tighten those up, right? And so there is some things that we've been saying, oh, we can push it off. So we're going to start picking back through that. But yeah, talking through some of the metrics, talking about how, it may just be, okay, hey, we're going to get this information in. How are we going to go through it? How are we going to vet it? And an internal process of how the planning group wants to go through it. And so I would think those are the couple of the big things, is the vetting process for the projects and starting to work on the chipping away at the goals.
And then the outreach committee will be meeting on the next day on the 25th at 10 is what I have written. So, and I know they're going to they should have a.
I will never go to another outreach committee meeting.
Okay. Kendall, so that would put us now for a meeting, for the full meeting or the full committee in April, early or mid-April?
we can stick with our, I mean, I don't know if it's a pattern anymore, but we can do the second or third Thursday in April, which would be the 14th or the 21st.
So on the 14th, the city of San Antonio is having their joint seminar. So Neff, I'm sure you, Rozzy, Macbeth, all those guys should be there at the seminar. You know, the one that the consultants all go to. So I mean, I would prefer on maybe the 21st.
I would say that's a perfect day to do it on the 14th then. Give a lot of us a good excuse not to go. Oh, I'm sorry. If we're on the afternoon of the 24th, I'm not available. That doesn't drive anything, but
24th or 21st?
I mean, sorry, 21st. 14th is good for me, but not 21st if it's the afternoon.
What about the 7th? Is that too early? April 7th in the afternoon? How does that work for
Yeah, that
you,
works.
Karen?
It works.
Works for me in the afternoon.
Yeah, that works for me.
If it's early enough, I can.
Yeah, no, I think it's one of those. I think Derek will be able to give an update in the process. I don't think there's anything that we need for approval from the group. There may be administrative things, and so I don't see the 7th being a problem at all. I mean, that's over a month away. So
Right. I'm also interested in as far as posting information. And would there be any issues?
No, sir, there would be no issues. So I would propose then Thursday, April 7th at 2 o'clock.
I like it.
Okay, I may have to bail early on that one then, but I've got an early. It's NIOSA.
We'll all go with you. We'll all go with you.
Can we meet offsite? Yeah, can we meet offsite?
All right, I'm starting to lose everybody here. Is there any other questions or comments as it relates to the date and potential agenda items? Any other agenda items that, any presentations or anything else that we feel we need to get to be able to help us in what we're doing? Today's presentation was excellent. So Mr. Mock is going to have a presentation on the early flood warning system that they're working on. Is there anything else that this committee is interested in doing? Debbie?
I did track down, there is a hydrology person with the Texas Water Development Board who's actually working on some modeling for nature-based solutions. I don't know if that would be of interest. I haven't actually gotten to talk to him yet, but they're doing it.
Why don't we have those conversations with them and see what they have, and if it's something worth it, we can entertain it. Anybody, any other agenda items that anybody would want to propose at this point? Hearing none, then we'll move on to agenda item 13, which is the adjourn of this meeting. Can I get a motion to adjourn?
Debbie Reed, I make a motion to adjourn.
Second.
Derek, second.
With a motion to adjourn in a second, our meeting is adjourned. Thank you all so much for this time. It's been a very productive meeting. Thank you, and we will see you certainly on the 7th, April 7th.
Adios.
Thanks, everyone.